G'day and welcome to another big edition of the RDFNL Footy Show, previewing the first semi-final. Thanks to McDonald's. My name's Yeendy. I'm joined by Tara Murray. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We've got the big game on Sunday afternoon over at Romsey Park, and we've got two rivals going head-to-head. It is Riddell and Rupertswood. What a contest this shapes up to be.
It is. These two have sort of, not just on the footy field, but also the netball court, built up a little bit of a rivalry the last few years. So it's quite an interesting one and another aspect added to it this year.
Absolutely. This is these two faced off in a final in fairly recent years, where I think it was last year where Riddell come from behind in the second half to beat Rupertswood and send them crashing out of the final series and them advancing through to a grand final. This is just unbelievable circumstances we've got between these two sides. Rupertswood yet to win a final, and the Bombers, like diggers, once they get in there, they cause a lot of headaches.
It is, and last year it was an elimination final between these two sides after they'd played off in the final round of the season, and Rupertswood had done the damage in that final round before the Bombers turned it around. And you look this year again, Riddell's most recent two losses, I think they've won 9 out of 11 games, and those two losses have both gone to the Sharks. And obviously the first game, they were quite convincing margins. Sharks weren't happy with the result in the first game. They thought they should have won by more. And the second game, I think, was only 2-3 weeks out from the end of the season, and that was a really, really strong performance by the Sharks.
That was probably one of the better performances of the season, particularly against the Bombers side that had won, it was 9 games in a row, 9 games in a row. So a team filled with great momentum. And I guess since then, the Bombers have bounced back from that because they've won games by bigger margins during their more so than during their big streak.
Exactly, and the Bombers have returned to form. It was just one game. They've had one poor game, and with a young side, you're going to expect that. Obviously, as you mentioned, that was Sharks. That was probably one of their better performances. It was probably pretty similar to the first half of last week against Macedon in the qualifying final, where the pressure from the Sharks was immense, except that day they were able to keep that all day.
Yeah. Now, I know the talk around this week, and Rupertswood, they haven't won a final, and I know plenty of them get asked the question or make the comment of, we make finals, and plenty of people are saying, oh, look, we'll get bundled out this week. They've got no faith in us, and we'll basically try and stick it up them, so to speak, to try and prove the critics wrong. But I think they're up against a team that I think shocked the world last weekend for starters. I think not so much the result, but the margin. They're coming up against a team that has now put their hand up and said they're a genuine contender this year.
And I think I said midway through the season that no one would want to play Riddell come finals time.
Yep.
We saw what they did last year. They weren't expected to make a grand final last year. They made a grand final. Scores were level at extra time at the end of the game, so they weren't that far off actually pinching a premiership.
Yeah, and they had a young lineup as well.
And this year it's even younger lineup. I think they've had 14, 15 players make their debut. They had, I think, between 4 and 6 players actually play their first senior final on the weekend, so they've got that experience under their belt now. So it's going to be very interesting, and no one wants to play the Bombers at this time of year.
I do find it fascinating though, and I haven't seen enough of the Bombers this year during their hot run. I've personally only seen them the game where it all started, where they beat Wood and Heskett. They come from behind to get the job done there, and they kick-started a massive winning streak. But I look at their lineup and I go, that is filled with youth. And how does we both barracked for Essendon, I'm going to use the phrase, how do the baby Bombers, like the equivalent of 93, they come out and perform so well against players that have got more experience and more size and more athleticism?
They seem to have that belief that no one expects them to do anything, and that can be a big thing come finals. If you've got expectations on you, then you've got to try and live up to them. The Bombers don't. A lot of people thought that the Bombers weren't going to make finals after their start of the season. No one expected the Bombers last season to make a grand final. So they've got no expectations. They're going out there, and every week for them is a bonus now. Yes, they'd like to win, but it's a bonus.
Now let's talk about the Sharks. They've got we know that they are an absolute quality team right across the board. Their depth in the competition, which, we'll be honest, I'm surprised they haven't won a senior premiership yet, and I'm pretty sure there's plenty of other people out there as well. Particularly, I'm surprised they haven't rocked up on grand final day and they've had their reserves, seniors, under 18 and a halves just take it all in one foul swoop, because their talent is as good as any other in the region, because they've got a good pool to draw from. I listened to the boys, and I listened to the team on Highlands FM the other week when I was driving up to Ballarat, and I was hearing names like Dan Kavanagh and Ned Hogan. These guys that are dominating in reserves level, and I remember seeing them carve it up at under 18s level, going, why aren't these guys playing senior footy? Their depth is just absolutely amazing, and on paper is as good as any other in the competition.
It is, and probably the one thing they might be lacking is the starts. They've got that depth, but do they have enough stars in the right positions to get them over the line? And obviously they've gone out and got players to try and fill those gaps the last couple of years. Dean Putt's one of them in the ruck.
Yep.
You've brought him in. You've brought Sean Hetherington back, who's added a goal-kicking midfielder. So they've started to add those other pieces, just those finishing touches. I think you've got those players coming through, but it's making sure that they're all coming through at the same time. And I think whether they're, because they're still pretty young, I think they had close to 10 debutants this season.
Yep.
But it could be another 2-3 years before we see the full, really strong Rupertswood side.
And we have spoken about it across the year as well. We have put not necessarily playing against each other, but we have put the Bombers and the Sharks together in the same pool to go, well, the Sharks have got their good young kids coming through their blood, as you mentioned, a lot of debutants. So they've got sides with a lot of young kids in there.
They both do, and it's
the best in the competition, I think.
Yeah, it's positive sides for the future for both of those sides. They've got that depth coming through, and it's only going to help them further down the track. And obviously, you think Diggers Rest has been so strong for a long time. They've started to bring a bit more youth in, but it's whether these couple of sides, which are really building now, could be the powerhouses in 3 to 4 years.
I think the one thing that's really lacking for the Sharks, and I know the great man has been gone for a number of seasons now, but if he had been in the side, Lee Brennan. You have him as that strong, tall forward option who leads well, can play further up the ground. A player like him, I think if you were able to insert him, have him back to the Sharks in this current lineup, I think that'd almost be unbeatable, because that's the one thing they've lacked this year.
It is, and that key forward has been. And look, I think they wanted Dean Putt to spend a bit more time forward than what he has, but you haven't had Joel West play for a number of weeks, so it's meant that Dean Putt's had to basically ruck for most of the season. Yes, he's got help from Jordan Berry at times, from Aidan Muir, but they're not traditional ruckmen. They're facing these bigger guys, and while they're competitive, they can't sustain it against your big guys. So Dean Putt's had to play in the ruck a lot more. I think they would have loved to have had him forward, which gives you that key forward option. You look, Todd Polderzak's probably their key target down there, and he kicked a couple on the weekend. He had his hands on a few more. If he could have taken those grabs, he wasn't that far away. If he had taken them, he could have quite easily had 4 or 5 goals.
Now, if you look at it at the end of the day, you've got two quality sides going head to head, and I mean, we from our understanding, but when we're sort of putting this together, Dean Putt probably won't play. Unlikely. He's got with his leg injury, it's going to be tough. But all right, we'll go on the basis that he doesn't play. What happens to the Rupertswood lineup?
Well, that's going to be the key. And I said Dean Putt is the key for Rupertswood if he plays. Obviously, looking at last week's fixture, Rupertswood named 23 players.
Yep.
The player who did not play, Joel West.
Yep.
So if Putt doesn't play, does Joel West come back in? What's the fitness of Jordan Berry, another one who can come into that ruck? Or do they bring, you look at their reserves. Apparently their reserves ruckmen were really, really strong on Saturday. So I was watching the netball, didn't see that.
Yeah.
But you've got those up. So you've got to look at those other options. Joel West could be the key. If Putt doesn't play, does Joel West play? And
does that, when you make your tip, does that determine the outcome of the game?
Look, I'm still going to go Rupertswood.
Yep.
I'm going to stick with it, and that they're going to get a win and get a final. Dean Putt is my key for the game, though.
Yep. I'm on the Bombers bandwagon. I just think their pace, electricity, excitement. Since the last time these two teams met, they've taken to every game like a final, and they've played some amazing football. So I haven't had a chance to see both of them at full flight yet, but just judging by the young wave of kids coming through, there's and the way they coach both teams are coached very well. But Jamie Elliott, he knows what it's like to coach. He's coached the 2 losing grand finals in the RDFNL, and in good games as well. I just think they're probably just going to have a little bit too much up their sleeve at the moment. And out of all the teams to be sitting in the top 4 that have been remaining, they're the 2 teams that don't have a designated full forward and a key position player. So they rely on their midfield. So they're running parallel. Their midfields kick a lot of goals. They've got that youth coming through, and they've had to throw a few players forward to maybe pinch hit forward and kick goals.
Yeah, obviously, and you look at that, then you go, Kev is a premiership winning coach in the
Correct.
AFL. So you've got both these coaches have been involved in finals, both know what you have to do at this time of the year. And you mentioned that not even full forward, but then Matthew Knox for Macedon's more a centre half forward. They don't have a traditional 4 forward. Diggers Rest has switched their forward line up all season, so all 4 of these sides don't rely on a traditional 4 forward to kick most of their goals. So they're all pretty similar in that aspect. So it's going to depend on who can stand up at the right time. If Putt doesn't play, you've got Liam Reid is the Bombers ruckman. It's a big difference, Liam Reid to Tom Waters.
Yeah.
So you've obviously got someone that element, not as experienced, not someone to take on the game like probably a Tommy Waters does. So I think it's going to be quite interesting. As you mentioned, I think the Bombers have got a lot of run, and you're going to be interested in how the 2 teams pull up from the weekend. Heavy ground on Sunday at Clark Oval for the Bombers. Young body, is that going to have an impact? from all reports, the Sharks were pretty sore after their game as well. So it's going to be who pulls up as better as well.
Certainly going to be a very exciting first semi-final down at Romsey Park on Sunday. And make sure you listen to Team from Highlands FM from 9:30am. Tara, thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to catching up with you next week as we count down to the grand final.
Thanks for having me.